The Carter family dinner had been going exactly as expected. Loud conversations overlapping, the scent of my mother's signature pot roast filling the dining room, and my father's booming laugh punctuating the chaos every few minutes. It was our monthly Sunday gathering, with all the familiar rhythms I'd grown accustomed to since childhood. I was helping my mother clear the dinner plates when my father clinked his knife against his wine glass, calling for everyone's attention. The table gradually quieted. My older sister Eliza stopped mid-sentence in her story about her latest promotion. My brother-in-law Daniel set down his phone, and even my 7-year-old niece Hannah looked up from the dessert she'd been secretly nibbling before it was officially served. "Since we're all together," my father announced with unusual formality, "your mother and I wanted to share some news." I set down the stack of plates I'd been collecting, sensing this wasn't a typical family announcement. My father reached for my mother's hand, their fingers intertwining with the easy familiarity of 35 years of marriage. "As you know, your grandmother's birthday is next month," he continued. "She'll be turning 85, and we've been thinking about family traditions." My grandmother, Eleanor Carter, sat at the opposite end of the table, her silver hair perfectly coiffed as always, her sapphire blue eyes, the ones I'd inherited, watching my father with a curious expression. "We've decided," my father said, his voice warming with emotion, "that it's time to pass down the Carter family ring." A small gasp escaped from Eliza. I felt a curious tightening in my chest. The Carter ring was legendary in our family, a stunning vintage piece featuring a central sapphire surrounded by diamonds, passed down through generations of Carter women. My great-grandmother had worn it, then my grandmother, and finally my mother on her wedding day. It was more than jewelry. It was our family's most treasured heirloom. After discussing it, my father continued, "We've decided that Eliza, as the eldest daughter, will be the next keeper of the ring." Eliza's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes immediately welling with tears. "Really? Are you sure?" My mother nodded, her expression tender. "We think it's time. You're established in your career, married with a beautiful family of your own. The ring should continue its journey." As Eliza rushed around the table to embrace our parents, I remained frozen in place, a stack of dirty plates forgotten in my hands. At 28, I was 3 years younger than my sister and decidedly less established. No prestigious corporate job, no husband, no children. Just a modestly successful ceramic studio and a life that looked nothing like what my parents had envisioned for me. I'd never expected to receive the ring instead of Eliza. The eldest daughter tradition was clear. Yet something about the way my parents emphasized her accomplishments, her proper job, her proper marriage, her proper life choices, made the moment sting in unexpected ways. As congratulations echoed around the table, I noticed my grandmother hadn't joined the celebration. While everyone else was focused on Eliza, Grandma Eleanor's eyes remained fixed on me, her expression unreadable. "Sophie," she called, her voice cutting through the commotion with surprising strength. "Would you help me to the sunroom, dear? I need a moment of quiet." Grateful for the escape, I set down the plates and moved to my grandmother's side, offering my arm for support. As we slowly made our way from the dining room, I could feel the weight of her hand on my forearm and the even heavier weight of the unspoken tension between us. Neither of us realized that in the sunroom, away from the family's celebration, a conversation was about to unfold that would challenge everything I thought I knew about the Carter family ring, and my place in the family history. The sunroom had always been my grandmother's domain in my parents' house. Filled with thriving plants and comfortable wicker furniture with faded floral cushions, it offered a peaceful retreat from the bustle of family gatherings. Late afternoon sunlight streamed through the windows, casting long shadows across the tiled floor as I helped Grandma Eleanor settle into her favorite chair. "Would you like some tea?" I asked, adjusting a small cushion behind her back. "No, Sophie, sit with me." She patted the space beside her, her arthritic fingers adorned with several rings, though notably not the Carter sapphire, which had gone to my mother on her wedding day 35 years ago. I perched on the edge of the seat, my hands fidgeting in my lap. From the dining room, I could hear the continued exclamations over the ring, Eliza's voice rising with excitement as she presumably tried it on. "You're disappointed," my grandmother stated, never one to dance around difficult topics. "No, of course not," I replied automatically. "The ring always goes to the eldest daughter. It's tradition." Grandma Eleanor studied me with those piercing blue eyes, the exact shade of the sapphire in question, a feature she had passed down to me, but not to Eliza, who had inherited our mother's warm brown eyes instead. "You're a terrible liar, Sophie. Always have been." A hint of amusement softened her words. "Your face gives everything away." I sighed, abandoning the pretense. Fine. I'm not disappointed exactly, just, I don't know. It feels like another reminder that Eliza is doing everything right, and I'm the family's creative detour. My sister had followed the expected path with remarkable precision: college, MBA, corporate career, marriage to Daniel, himself a successful attorney, and Hannah, their perfect child. My path had been considerably less linear. After majoring in art history, I'd worked a series of jobs before apprenticing with a ceramic artist. 3 years ago, I'd opened my own studio, creating high-fired functional pottery that had begun to develop a modest following. I lived in a small apartment above my workshop, dated occasionally but hadn't found anyone serious, and generally existed on the periphery of what my parents considered a successful adult life. A creative detour, my grandmother repeated thoughtfully. Is that how you see yourself? I shrugged, uncomfortable with having voiced the insecurity aloud. It's fine, really. Eliza deserves the ring. She'll probably pass it to Hannah someday, and the tradition will continue exactly as it should. Grandma Eleanor reached for a small, leather-bound album that perpetually resided on the side table next to her chair. I recognized it as one of her treasured photo collections, this one containing family pictures from long before my birth. Did I ever tell you the full story of the Carter ring? She asked, her fingers tracing the embossed cover of the album. I know it came from Great-Grandma Rose, then to you, then to Mom, I replied. And now it will go to Eliza. That's the simplified version, she said, opening the album to reveal black and white photographs from what appeared to be the 1940s. But heirlooms, like families, usually have more complicated histories than the stories we tell at dinner tables. She turned to a specific page and pointed to a photograph of a young woman, perhaps in her early 20s, standing in front of a shop window. She wore a simple dress cinched at the waist, her dark hair styled in the fashion of the era, and her expression contained a quiet determination that seemed familiar somehow. This is Rose, my grandmother said. My mother, your great-grandmother. I'd seen photos of Great-Grandma Rose before, but this one was unfamiliar. That's her shop, isn't it? The ceramic studio she owned? My grandmother nodded, a smile crinkling the corners of her eyes. Carter Ceramics. Founded 1945, when most women were leaving wartime jobs, not starting businesses. There was unmistakable pride in her voice. Everyone thought she was mad, opening an art studio when she should have been focusing on marriage and family. This was a part of our family history I'd always connected with deeply. My great-grandmother's ceramic studio had operated for nearly 30 years, producing distinctive pottery that had developed a cult following among collectors. I kept several of her pieces in my own studio, inspiration from the woman whose creative legacy I had unknowingly followed. Rose didn't receive the ring as an eldest daughter, my grandmother continued, her voice taking on a storyteller's cadence. She received it as payment for a debt. I looked up in surprise. Payment? I thought it was a family heirloom passed through generations. It became that, Grandma Eleanor confirmed, but its entry into our family was considerably less romantic than your father's dinner speeches might suggest. She turned another page in the album, revealing a photograph of a distinguished-looking man standing next to Great-Grandma Rose. They were positioned in front of a kiln, both wearing work aprons, neither smiling, but standing with a comfortable familiarity. This is William Harrington, my grandmother explained. Wealthy collector, amateur potter, and the original owner of what we now call the Carter ring. I leaned closer, intrigued by this unfamiliar piece of family history. What happened? William commissioned a complete dining service from Rose. Plates, bowls, serving pieces, everything. A massive order that would have established her reputation and secured the studio's financial future. My grandmother's fingers traced the outline of the figures in the photograph. But then the market crashed in '29, and William lost nearly everything. He couldn't pay the substantial balance due for the commission. So he gave her the ring instead? I asked, trying to connect the dots. Not immediately. First, he tried to cancel the order, but Rose had already completed most of the work. They argued bitterly. William, like many men of his position, wasn't accustomed to a woman standing firm against him. Grandma Eleanor's voice carried a hint of satisfaction, but Rose refused to release the commission pieces without payment. She turned to another page, showing a close-up photograph of a younger Rose, now wearing the unmistakable sapphire ring on her right hand. Eventually, William offered the ring, a family piece he'd managed to keep from his creditors. Rose had it appraised and found its value exceeded what William owed her. She accepted it as payment, completed the commission, and even returned the difference to him in cash. I sat back, processing this revelation. So the Carter family ring wasn't originally a Carter family ring at all? No, my grandmother confirmed. It became ours through Rose's business acumen and her refusal to be dismissed or devalued, traits that seem to resurface in certain generations. Her eyes, so similar to mine, held a meaningful look. Before I could respond, the sunroom door opened and my mother appeared, her expression bright with the evening's excitement. There you are. Eliza wants you both to come see how the ring looks on her. It fits perfectly, as if it were made for her. My grandmother carefully closed the photo album and set it aside. We'll be right there, Margaret, she replied, her tone pleasant, but containing a note that made my mother hesitate. Is everything all right? Mom asked, looking between us with sudden concern. Perfectly fine, Grandma Eleanor assured her. I was just sharing some family history with Sophie. We'll join you in a moment. After my mother retreated, my grandmother turned back to me, her expression now intensely focused. Before we return to the celebration, there's something else you should know about the ring and about Rose. She reached for my hand, her cool fingers wrapping around mine with surprising strength. The tradition of passing the ring to the eldest daughter didn't begin until my generation. Rose had very different ideas about family legacies. Something in her tone made me lean closer, sensing we had reached the heart of the story she wanted to tell. What do you mean? Rose believed that the ring should go to the Carter woman who most embodied her spirit, not by order of birth, but by character and choice. My grandmother's eyes held mine steadily. I wasn't the eldest daughter either, Sophie, but I was the one who followed Rose into ceramics, who understood her passion for creating beautiful, functional art. This revelation landed with unexpected weight. The eldest daughter tradition I'd accepted without question suddenly seemed less fixed, less inevitable. Does Mom know this? I asked. Your mother knows the simplified version of the story, the version your grandfather preferred to tell, with its emphasis on orderly succession. A hint of old frustration colored my grandmother's voice. By the time I inherited the ring, the eldest daughter narrative had already taken hold. I didn't fight it when it came time to pass it to Margaret, though perhaps I should have. From the dining room came the sound of glasses clinking and more exclamations, the celebration continuing without us. My grandmother rose slowly to her feet, waving away my offered assistance. We should join them, she said, moving toward the door with small, careful steps. But remember what I've told you about Rose and about the ring's true history. Sometimes family traditions deserve to be questioned, especially when they've strayed from their original purpose. As we made our way back to the dining room, I felt a shift in my understanding, not just of the ring, but of my place in the family lineage. For the first time, I wondered if there might be more to this evening's announcement than a simple acknowledgement of birth order and traditional roles. The truth my grandmother had begun to reveal was already unsettling the foundation of what I'd accepted without question. And as we rejoined the family celebration, I sensed that her story was not yet complete, that the most significant revelation about the Carter sapphire was still to come. The dining room had transformed during our absence. My mother had brought out her best china for dessert, the special occasions that only used for milestone celebrations, and my father was pouring champagne into crystal flutes. At the center of the table sat a small velvet box, open to display the Carter ring in all its vintage glory. Eliza looked up as we entered, her face glowing with happiness. Grandma Sophie, come see, it fits perfectly. She extended her hand, where the sapphire sparkled on her slender finger. I moved to examine the ring more closely, now seeing it through the lens of my grandmother's revelations. The central sapphire was deep blue, exactly the shade of Grandma Eleanor's eyes and mine, surrounded by small, brilliant cut diamonds in a platinum setting typical of the 1920s. It was undeniably beautiful, but now I recognized it as something more complex than just a family heirloom. It was a symbol of Great-Grandma Rose's determination and business acumen, a piece that had entered our family through her refusal to have her work devalued. It's lovely on you, I said sincerely, embracing my sister. Despite my complicated feelings about the evening's revelations, I couldn't begrudge Eliza her joy. Here, Grandma, what do you think? Eliza asked, extending her hand toward our grandmother for inspection. Grandma Eleanor studied the ring with an inscrutable expression. The sapphire always did look best against fair skin, she commented, though her tone contained a note I couldn't quite interpret. My father handed around champagne flutes. A toast, he announced, raising his glass. To the Carter ring, may it continue to be passed down through generations of Carter women, carrying our family legacy forward. As everyone raised their glasses, Grandma Eleanor's voice cut through the moment with unexpected clarity. though perhaps we should be clear about what that legacy truly is. A curious silence fell over the table. My mother laughed nervously. Mom, we all know the tradition. The ring passes to the eldest daughter in each generation. That's the tradition Robert prefers, my grandmother replied, nodding toward my father. But it's not how the ring came to me, nor what Rose intended for its journey through our family. My father's expression tightened slightly. Eleanor, this may not be the best time for family history lessons. We're celebrating Eliza's moment. On the contrary, my grandmother countered, her voice gaining strength despite her frail appearance. This is precisely the time for truth, before decisions become irreversible. She turned to address the entire table. The Carter ring was never meant to pass simply by order of birth. Rose was clear about that when she gave it to me. Eliza looked between our grandmother and parents, confusion evident on her face. I don't understand. If not to the eldest daughter, then how is it supposed to be passed down? Rose believed the ring should go to the Carter woman who most embodied her spirit, Grandma Eleanor explained, echoing what she'd told me in the sunroom, the one who carried forward her legacy of creativity, independence, and artistic vision. My mother set down her champagne glass with more force than necessary. Mom, we discussed this years ago. The ring follows the traditional path through the family line. That's how these things work. That's how your father decided it should work, my grandmother corrected, a lifetime of disagreement evident in her tone. Thomas always preferred clear rules and hierarchies. He found Rose's approach too unpredictable, too subjective. My grandfather Thomas had passed away 15 years ago, but his influence on our family structure remained evident. A bank executive with traditional values, he had established many of the patterns we still followed, often without questioning. When the ring came to me, Grandma Eleanor continued, her gaze sweeping the table, it wasn't because I was the eldest. I had an older sister, as some of you may remember. The ring came to me because I was the one who continued Rose's work in ceramics, who understood her artistic vision. I felt a strange sensation in my chest, something between recognition and foreboding. Across the table, my father's expression had hardened into the look he got when family discussions veered into uncomfortable territory. That's a lovely sentiment, Eleanor, he said, his tone carefully controlled. But we've established the current tradition over 2 generations now. Margaret received the ring as our eldest daughter, and now Eliza continues that line. A tradition based on a misunderstanding, my grandmother insisted. Or perhaps a deliberate rewriting of Rose's intentions. The tension in the room had become palpable. My mother shot a concerned glance at my father, then at Eliza, who had unconsciously begun twisting the ring on her finger. What exactly are you suggesting, Mom? My mother asked cautiously. Grandma Eleanor's blue eyes, so like mine, fixed on me with sudden intensity. I'm suggesting that if we were following Rose's true intentions, the ring would go to Sophie. The statement landed like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples of shock around the table. I felt my face flush as all eyes turned toward me. To Sophie? My father repeated incredulously. Based on what criteria? Based on the criteria Rose established, my grandmother replied steadily. The ring goes to the Carter woman who carries forward her legacy of artistic vision and independent spirit. Sophie is the only one in this generation who has followed Rose's path, establishing her own ceramic studio, creating work that speaks with authentic artistic voice. Eliza looked down at the ring, then at me, her expression a complex mixture of confusion and dismay. I didn't know, no one ever said, because it wasn't relevant. My father interjected firmly. The tradition as we practice it is clear and fair. Birth order is objective, not subject to interpretation or comparison of accomplishments. The implication that Grandma Eleanor's criteria would somehow be unfair to Eliza hung in the air, unspoken but evident. I found myself in the uncomfortable position of being both a potential beneficiary of my grandmother's revelation and reluctant to disrupt what had been a joyful family moment for my sister. This isn't about questioning Eliza's worthiness, my grandmother clarified, seeming to read the undercurrents at the table. It's about honoring Rose's vision for how her legacy would continue. The ring came to our family through her work as an artist and businesswoman. She wanted it to follow that creative lineage, not simply a biological one. My mother, always the peacemaker, attempted to diffuse the growing tension. Perhaps this is a conversation for another time. Eliza has already received the ring, and we're in the middle of celebrating. Another time? My grandmother repeated with a small, sad smile. That's what you said when I raised these concerns before you gave the ring to Margaret. And now, here we are, another generation later, still perpetuating Thomas's version of the tradition rather than Rose's. "Grandma," I finally spoke, finding my voice despite the uncomfortable spotlight. "I appreciate what you're saying, but I don't want to create family conflict. The ring looks beautiful on Eliza. It belongs with her." "Does it?" my grandmother challenged gently. "Look at the color of the sapphire, Sophie. Compare it to your eyes, then to your sister's." I glanced at Eliza, whose warm brown eyes, so like our mother's, had begun to well with tears of confusion and distress. "The sapphire in that ring is the exact shade of blue that has passed down through specific generations of Carter women," Grandma Eleanor continued. "Rose had those eyes. I have those eyes. You have those eyes, Sophie. It's always been more than coincidence that the women who carried forward Rose's artistic legacy also carried her distinctive eye color." This observation, delivered with quiet certainty, shifted the atmosphere yet again. What had begun as a straightforward celebration had evolved into something more complex. A challenge to established family narrative, a questioning of how traditions are created and maintained, and potentially a rethinking of who in our family embodied our matriarch's true legacy. "I think," my father said after a tense silence, "that we should table this discussion for now. Eliza has received the ring in good faith, following what we understood to be family tradition." "Of course," Grandma Eleanor agreed with surprising equanimity. "I simply felt it was important that Sophie and everyone else understand the ring's true history before assumptions became irreversible facts." She turned to Eliza with genuine kindness. "The ring is beautiful on you, dear, and perhaps knowing its full story will give it even greater meaning." Eliza looked down at the sapphire, then at me, uncertainty written across her features. "Sophie, I had no idea. If Grandma is right, and the ring should go to you." "No," I interrupted firmly. "Dad's right. You received it in good faith. It's yours." But even as I spoke the reassuring words, I felt the weight of my grandmother's revelations settling into the family dynamic. The simple narrative of tradition we had all accepted without question had been disrupted by her voice, her insistence on a more complex truth. As dessert was served in an atmosphere of awkward politeness, I caught my grandmother watching me with a knowing expression. She had deliberately introduced this disruption, challenging not just the disposition of a piece of jewelry, but our entire understanding of family legacy and how it should be carried forward. The question now was what would happen next, how this newly revealed truth would reshape our relationships, our understanding of family history, and perhaps most importantly, how we defined and valued different kinds of contributions to the Carter legacy. After the uncomfortable revelation at dinner, the family gathering dispersed earlier than usual. Eliza and Daniel made excuses about needing to get Hannah home for bedtime, though it was clear the real motivation was to escape the suddenly tense atmosphere. My parents retreated to the kitchen, their hushed voices carrying an urgency that suggested continued discussion about the evening's unexpected turn. I found myself alone with Grandma Eleanor in the living room, both of us silent as we listened to the sounds of my mother loading the dishwasher with more force than necessary. "You've stirred up quite the hornet's nest," I finally observed, keeping my voice low. My grandmother's mouth curved into a slight smile. At my age, one develops a certain impatience with comfortable fictions, particularly when they obscure important truths. "Why now?" I asked. "If you disagreed with how the ring was being passed down, why wait until after it was given to Eliza to speak up?" "I did speak up, years ago, when your mother received the ring. Thomas was still alive then, and his influence prevailed." She adjusted the crocheted throw across her lap. "As for why now, I'm 84, Sophie. I may not have another opportunity to correct the record." The implication of her mortality hung between us, adding weight to her words. I reached for her hand, its paper-thin skin and prominent veins a reminder of her fragility, despite her still sharp mind. "There's more to this story, isn't there?" I asked, sensing layers still unrevealed. She nodded slowly. "Rose's intentions for the ring were documented, not just spoken. That's what your father has always conveniently overlooked." Before she could elaborate, the doorbell rang, an unexpected sound at this hour on a Sunday evening. From the kitchen, I heard my mother's exclamation of surprise, followed by the murmur of voices at the front door. Moments later, Eliza appeared in the living room entryway, still wearing her coat. Her expression was troubled, her right hand conspicuously bare of the sapphire ring that had adorned it earlier. "I couldn't leave things like that," she announced without preamble. "I've been thinking about what Grandma said all the way home, and then halfway there I turned around and came back." She looked directly at me. "We need to talk about this ring situation properly." My father appeared behind her, his expression a mixture of exasperation and concern. "Eliza, we've discussed this. The ring was given to you. Your grandmother's alternative perspective doesn't change that. But it changes what the ring means," Eliza insisted, coming fully into the room. "I can't wear it comfortably knowing there's this unresolved question about who should really have it." My mother joined us, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her expression suggesting she'd rather be anywhere but in the middle of this family conflict. "Where's Daniel and Hannah?" "I dropped them at home first," Eliza explained. "I needed to handle this myself." She turned back to me. "Sophie, did you know about Great-Grandma Rose's intentions for the ring before tonight?" "No," I answered honestly. "Grandma just told me the full story in the sunroom right before the toast." My grandmother shifted in her seat, drawing everyone's attention. "Perhaps it's time I showed all of you what I should have insisted on years ago." She reached for her handbag, which sat on the side table next to her chair, and withdrew an envelope that looked worn from age and handling. "Rose left a letter with the ring when she passed it to me. I've kept it all these years, though your grandfather would have preferred I destroy it." My father tensed visibly. "Mother, if you're referring to Rose's personal writings, we've been through this. Informal notes don't override established family traditions." "These aren't informal notes, Robert," my grandmother replied sharply. "This is Rose's explicit statement of intent regarding the ring's succession." She held out the envelope to me. "Sophie, would you read it aloud? My eyes aren't what they used to be, and I want everyone to hear the exact wording." With a sense of participating in something momentous, I accepted the envelope and carefully extracted several sheets of delicate stationery, yellowed with age. The handwriting was elegant but firm, a strong hand that had formed decisive strokes with fountain pen ink now faded to sepia. "April 15, 1968, I read, noting the date written at the top of the first page. "My dearest Eleanor." The letter began with personal reflections. Rose's pride in my grandmother's artistic accomplishments, observations about family matters from 50 years earlier. I skimmed until I reached the relevant section, then read more carefully. "As my health continues to decline, I must address the matter of the sapphire ring that has been both my business salvation and my personal talisman these many years. You know its origin story, how it came to me not through family lineage but through my own determination to have my work valued appropriately. It is my explicit wish that this ring continue its journey through our family in the same spirit that brought it to us, not following arbitrary rules of birth order or conventional succession, but seeking out the Carter woman in each generation who most embodies the independent spirit and creative vision that defined my life's work. In your generation, Eleanor, this is unquestionably you. Despite Thomas's traditional views and your sister Margaret's expectations as the eldest, you are the one who has carried forward my work in ceramics, who understands that creating beautiful, functional art requires both technical skill and a courageous heart. When the time comes for you to pass the ring forward, I ask that you look for these same qualities, not merely biological position or societal accomplishment, but the true inheritance of artistic spirit and independent character. The sapphire's distinctive blue, so like your eyes and mine, seems to follow this same path through our family line, a visible reminder of the less tangible legacy I hope to preserve. The ring is more than jewelry. It is the physical embodiment of a different kind of family wealth, the richness of creative vision and the courage to follow one's own path, even when that path diverges from conventional expectations. I paused, looking up from the letter to find everyone watching me with varying expressions. My grandmother with vindication, my father with barely concealed frustration, my mother with growing discomfort, and Eliza with an intense focus I rarely saw from my usually easygoing sister. "There's more," I said, turning to the next page. "Should you find that the ring has been diverted from its intended path, whether through misunderstanding or deliberate reinterpretation of my wishes, I hope you will have the courage to correct its course. Some traditions deserve preservation precisely because they honor individual spirit rather than conformity to external expectations. With all my love and artistic fellowship, Rose." As I finished reading, a weighted silence filled the room. The letter, written over 50 years ago, seemed to speak directly to our current situation with uncanny prescience. "I remember when Grandma Rose gave you that letter along with the ring," my mother said quietly, breaking the silence. "Dad said it was just her artistic temperament, that structured family traditions were more important than one person's unconventional ideas. Your father was very good at dismissing women's clearly stated intentions as mere temperament," Grandma Eleanor replied. a lifetime of disagreement evident in her tone, particularly when those intentions didn't align with his notions of proper order. My father sighed heavily. Mother, you know it wasn't that simple. Dad was trying to prevent family conflict. If the ring's succession became a matter of subjective judgment in each generation, it would create exactly the kind of tension we're experiencing tonight. The tension exists because we've ignored Rose's explicit wishes, my grandmother countered. Because we've pretended the eldest daughter tradition has deeper roots than one man's preference for clear hierarchies. Eliza, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, suddenly opened her purse and withdrew the small velvet box containing the ring. She placed it on the coffee table between us. I don't want to wear a ring that carries this kind of unresolved conflict, she said firmly. Not when Great-Grandma Rose's wishes were so clear, and especially not when Sophie is so obviously the person she described. She turned to me with unexpected intensity. You're the one who inherited her talent, her vision. You're the one with the same blue eyes. You even have her name as your middle name. This last point struck me with surprising force. I'd always known my middle name, Rose, came from my great-grandmother, but had never considered it significant. Now it seems like another thread connecting me to her legacy. The ring was given to you, Eliza, I protested, uncomfortable with the direction the conversation had taken. I don't want to create family division over jewelry, no matter how meaningful. It's not just jewelry, Grandma Eleanor and Eliza said simultaneously, then looked at each other in surprise. Rose didn't see it as merely decorative, my grandmother continued. She saw it as symbolic of a particular kind of inheritance, one based on shared vision and spirit rather than conventional markers of success or position. My mother, who had remained mostly silent during this exchange, finally spoke up. I remember when Mom tried to explain this to Dad. He said family traditions needed to be clear and objective, not based on subjective judgments about who was most like Rose in each generation. And so he created a different tradition, I observed, one that prioritized his values instead of Rose's. Precisely, my grandmother confirmed. Thomas preferred order and clarity. Rose valued authentic expression and individual spirit. In the end, his preference prevailed, until tonight. The velvet box containing the ring sat on the coffee table between us, its presence both physical and symbolic. What had begun as a straightforward celebration had evolved into a complex reckoning with family history, the nature of tradition, and how successive generations interpret, or reinterpret, the intentions of those who came before. I think, Eliza said after a moment of consideration, that we need to honor Great-Grandma Rose's wishes. The ring should go to Sophie. The directness of her statement caught me off guard. Eliza, no, I don't want to take something that was given to you. It's not about taking, she insisted. It's about acknowledging that some things find their right place through correction rather than continuation. She smiled slightly. Besides, the sapphire really does match your eyes perfectly. On me, it just looks like a pretty blue stone. On you, it looks like inheritance. My father started to object, but my mother placed a restraining hand on his arm. Robert, she said quietly, I think it's time we listen to what Rose actually wanted, not what your father decided was best. This unexpected shift in alliance, my mother siding with my grandmother rather than my father, created a palpable pause in the family dynamic. For decades, the pattern had been set. My grandfather's preferences became family policy, with my grandmother's objections noted but overruled. Now, 3 generations of Carter women were aligning around a different understanding of how family legacy should be determined and distributed, one that honored individual spirit and authentic connection rather than conventional hierarchies. As the velvet box containing the sapphire ring sat between us, its destination suddenly uncertain, I realized we had reached a turning point not just in the ring's journey, but in our understanding of what it meant to be a Carter. The voice from the past, my great-grandmother Rose, speaking through her letter and through my grandmother's insistence on truth, had disrupted decades of unquestioned tradition, creating space for a new, more authentic alignment with our family's creative legacy. The following Saturday found me alone in my ceramic studio, hands deep in clay as I worked on a commission for a local restaurant, a set of serving platters with a custom glaze I'd been developing for weeks. The familiar rhythm of the wheel and the earthy scent of wet clay usually centered me. But today, my thoughts kept returning to the unresolved situation with the family ring. After Eliza's dramatic return and the reading of Rose's letter, we'd reached an uneasy pause. The ring remained in its velvet box, temporarily in my grandmother's possession, while the family took time to process, as my father had put it. Though Eliza had clearly stated her wish to honor Rose's intentions by passing the ring to me, My parents, particularly my father, remained conflicted about disrupting what they'd long considered established tradition. I was so absorbed in these thoughts that I didn't hear the studio door open, only becoming aware of visitors when a familiar voice called my name. "Sophie? Are you in the back?" I looked up to find my mother standing in the doorway to the workshop area, with Grandma Eleanor beside her, supported by her walking cane. "Mom? Grandma?" I quickly wiped my clay-covered hands on a nearby towel. "I wasn't expecting you. Is everything okay?" "Everything's fine," my mother assured me, helping Grandma Eleanor to the small seating area I maintained for clients. "We wanted to see you, that's all. And your grandmother insisted on coming to the studio rather than having you visit the house. I wanted to see where you work," my grandmother explained, her eyes already taking in the details of my space. The shelves of finished pieces waiting for firing, the sketches pinned to corkboards, the collection of glazes lined up by color family. "It's important to understand an artist's environment." There was something deliberate in her tone that suggested this wasn't merely a casual visit. I pulled up chairs for them, conscious of the clay dust that seemed to coat every surface despite my regular cleaning. "I can put on some tea," I offered, suddenly aware of hosting my grandmother in my modest workspace. "No need for that," Grandma Eleanor replied, waving away the suggestion. "I didn't come for hospitality. I came to see you work." My mother looked slightly uncomfortable, as if she wasn't entirely sure of her role in this visit. "Your grandmother has been talking about Rose's studio nonstop since Sunday night. Apparently your setup is remarkably similar." "Is it?" I asked, genuinely curious. Though I'd inherited several of Rose's pieces and knew her work intimately, I'd never seen photographs of her actual workspace. Grandma Eleanor nodded, her eyes continuing to catalog details. "The organization of your tools, the position of your wheel relative to the natural light, even your preference for working alone rather than in a communal space, all very reminiscent of how Rose arranged her studio." She reached into her handbag and withdrew a photograph I hadn't seen before, a color image from what appeared to be the 1960s, showing an older woman at a potter's wheel, her silver hair tied back with a scarf, her hands shaped around a rising form of clay with practiced precision. "This is the last photograph taken of Rose in her studio," my grandmother explained, handing it to me. "About a year before she passed. Look at her hands, 80 years old and still perfectly steady on the wheel." I studied the image with newfound interest, noting details I recognized from my own practice. The particular angle of her fingers as they shaped the clay, the slight furrow of concentration between her brows, the organized chaos of tools within arm's reach, and most strikingly, the sapphire ring gleaming on her right hand, seemingly unbothered by the clay that must have constantly threatened to dull its brilliance. "She wore the ring while working?" I asked, surprised by this detail. "Always," my grandmother confirmed. Said it reminded her of its origins, that it came to her through her work, not through marriage or inheritance. She only took it off for the most aggressive processes, like mixing glazes with toxic compounds. My mother leaned forward to look at the photograph. "I never knew that. I always kept it in the safe except for special occasions, worried about damaging it." "Which is precisely why Rose would have questioned whether you were its proper guardian," Grandma Eleanor observed, though without rancor. She believed the ring should be worn, used, integrated into daily life, particularly creative life, not preserved like a museum piece. My mother sighed, a sound that contained decades of complicated family dynamics. "Mom, we've been through this. Dad felt strongly that family heirlooms needed to be protected and preserved. Thomas felt strongly about many things," my grandmother replied. "That didn't make him right about all of them." I handed the photograph back, conscious of the clay residue on my fingertips despite my attempt to clean them. "Not to be blunt, but why are you both here? I'm guessing this isn't just a casual studio tour." My mother and grandmother exchanged a look that suggested a previous conversation, or perhaps an ongoing negotiation. "We've been talking," my mother began carefully, "about Rose's letter, about the ring, about family traditions and how they evolve, or should evolve, over time. Your mother has been doing some reflection since Sunday night," Grandma Eleanor added, a note of satisfaction in her voice. "About choices made and not made, about whose voices have shaped our family narrative." My mother looked slightly uncomfortable at this characterization, but didn't contradict it. "I've been thinking about what Rose wrote, about looking for the Carter woman in each generation who embodies her independent spirit and creative vision, and about how perhaps we've been honoring the letter of tradition rather than its spirit." She reached into her purse and withdrew the familiar velvet box. My breath caught as she placed it on the small table between us. The more I've thought about it, the more I've realized that Rose's wishes were clear. The ring should follow the path of creative legacy, not just biological succession. She met my eyes directly. It should come to you, Sophie. The simplicity of her statement, delivered without qualification or evident reluctance, caught me off guard. I had expected more resistance, more attachment to the tradition as they had understood it for decades. "What about Dad?" I asked. "And Eliza? Your father is adjusting to the idea," my mother replied diplomatically. "He recognizes that Rose's letter represents a clear statement of intent regarding the ring's succession. As for Eliza, she's been remarkably insistent that we honor Rose's wishes. She called me yesterday," Grandma Eleanor added with evident approval. "Wanted to hear more stories about Rose, about her work and her philosophy. Said she'd never realized how much our family's artistic legacy had been, I believe, sidelined was the word she used, in the conventional narrative. This revelation about my sister, always the one who had followed the expected path without question, surprised me almost as much as my mother's apparent change of heart. So you're giving me the ring?" I asked, still processing this unexpected development. "We're acknowledging that it should have come to you from the beginning, if we'd been truly honoring Rose's intentions rather than Thomas's preferences," my mother clarified. "There's a difference." My grandmother smiled, the expression softening the lines of her face. "We're correcting the ring's path, returning it to the journey Rose envisioned." My mother opened the velvet box, revealing the sapphire ring nestled against dark fabric. In the natural light of my studio, the blue stone seemed particularly vibrant, almost alive with internal fire. "Try it on," she urged, holding the box toward me. I hesitated, suddenly aware of the clay still embedded in the creases of my knuckles, the rough texture of hands that worked with earth and water and fire daily. "I should clean up first." "No," my grandmother said firmly. "Take it as you are, with the evidence of your work still on your hands." That's exactly how Rose would have wanted it. With a strange sense of ceremony, I accepted the box and carefully removed the ring. It felt heavier than I expected, substantial with both physical weight and accumulated history. I slipped it onto the ring finger of my right hand, the same placement I'd noticed in the photograph of Rose at her wheel. "Perfect fit," my grandmother observed with evident satisfaction, "just as it should be." The sapphire caught the light from the studio windows, sending fractured blue reflections across the clay-dusted surfaces nearby. The color was indeed remarkably similar to my eyes and my grandmother's, a genetic echo reflected in gemstone. "How does it feel?" my mother asked quietly. I considered the question, aware of the ring's physical presence, but also something less tangible, a sense of connection to the woman who had brought it into our family through her insistence on the value of her creative work. "It feels right," I admitted, "like it belongs here, in this studio, on a hand that creates." My grandmother nodded, as if I'd confirmed something she'd long known. Rose believed objects carry energy, not in a mystical sense, but in the accumulated meaning they gather through their journey. That ring has always belonged in a studio, on the hand of a Carter woman who understands that creating beautiful, useful things is a form of power. My mother watched me with an expression I couldn't quite interpret, something between wistfulness and recognition. I never really understood that aspect of the ring. For me, it was always about tradition and family continuity, not creative legacy. "Which is why Rose would have questioned whether you were its proper guardian," my grandmother repeated, though her tone was gentle rather than accusatory. "Not everyone in a family carries forward the same elements of its history. You inherited different strengths, Margaret: organizational skills, diplomatic abilities, the capacity to create harmony in complex situations. Rose would have valued those too, just differently." This reframing, that different family members might carry forward different aspects of a shared legacy, struck me as a more expansive way of understanding inheritance than the rigid tradition we'd previously accepted. It created space for multiple forms of value, multiple ways of honoring family history. "So what happens now?" I asked, looking down at the ring that now adorned my hand, the tangible symbol of a creative legacy I'd been carrying forward without fully recognizing its connection to family history. "Now," my grandmother said with satisfaction, "the ring resumes its proper journey. You wear it, work with it, integrate it into your creative life as Rose intended. And eventually, when the time comes, you'll look for the Carter woman in the next generation who carries forward that same independent spirit and artistic vision." "And if there isn't one?" I asked, thinking of Eliza's daughter, Hannah, still too young for her path to be evident. "There will be," my grandmother replied with certainty. "Perhaps not in the way we expect or through the bloodlines we anticipate, but Rose's legacy is too strong to disappear. The ring will find its way, just as it found its way to you despite decades of detour." As I returned to my wheel, the sapphire ring now on my finger, where it would remain through countless future creations, I felt a shift in my understanding of family inheritance. Not just the physical objects that pass from generation to generation, but the less tangible legacies of vision, courage, and creative determination. The truth revealed by my grandmother's voice had redirected not just the journey of a piece of jewelry, but our entire family's understanding of how tradition should serve authentic connection, rather than conventional expectation. In correcting the ring's path, we had also begun to correct our understanding of what it meant to be a Carter, expanding the definition to honor creativity and independence alongside more traditional markers of success. 6 months after the sapphire ring found its way to my hand, my ceramic studio hosted its first major exhibition. What had begun as a modest workspace for my functional pottery had evolved into a small gallery space as well, with the front room transformed to showcase not only my work, but pieces from other local artists working in various media. The opening reception had drawn a larger crowd than I'd anticipated. Friends, fellow artists, regular clients, and most surprisingly, my entire family. My father, who had initially struggled with the redirection of the ring, stood examining a series of platters I'd created using a glaze technique inspired by one of Rose's original recipes. My mother moved among the guests with practiced social grace, while Eliza and Daniel kept an eye on Hannah, who was fascinated by a display of miniature ceramic animals I'd created specifically with younger visitors in mind. "You've created something remarkable here," my grandmother's voice came from beside me. She had insisted on attending despite the challenges of navigating a crowded space with her cane, and now surveyed the gallery with evident pride. Not just the work itself, but the environment. A space where art is both accessible and respected. That was always the goal, I acknowledged, watching as a young couple examined a set of nesting bowls with serious consideration. Functional pieces that bring beauty into everyday life, just like Rose believed in. "She would be pleased," Grandma Eleanor said simply. "Not just with your work, but with how you've honored her vision for the ring." I glanced down at my right hand, where the sapphire caught the gallery lighting, sending blue reflections dancing across the white walls. Unlike my mother, who had kept the ring secured except for special occasions, I wore it daily. While working at the wheel, glazing pieces, even packing orders for shipment, it had become an integral part of my creative practice, just as it had been for Rose. Only once had I questioned this approach, when a particularly abrasive glaze component had threatened to scratch the setting. I'd mentioned this concern to my grandmother, who had laughed and told me Rose had actually had the platinum setting reinforced specifically to withstand studio work. She believed creativity should never be constrained by fear of damage, Grandma Eleanor had explained. To her, the ring's value came from its active participation in the creative process, not its pristine condition. My contemplation was interrupted by Eliza, who approached with 2 glasses of wine, offering one to me. "Congratulations," she said, gesturing around the packed gallery. "This is quite an achievement." "Thank you," I replied, accepting both the wine and the genuine warmth behind her words. In the months since the ring's redirection, our relationship had evolved in unexpected ways. Without the unacknowledged competition that had long shadowed our interactions, we'd begun developing a more authentic connection based on mutual respect for our different paths. "I've been thinking," Eliza said, her voice taking on the thoughtful tone that typically preceded her more significant observations, "about Rose's letter and what she wrote about the ring following a path through the family based on shared vision rather than birth order." "What about it?" I asked, curious where her thoughts were leading. "It's made me reconsider how we think about family legacy more broadly," she explained. "Not just as something that passes automatically through bloodlines, but as something that seeks out genuine connection and continuity of spirit." She nodded toward Hannah, who was now receiving an impromptu pottery demonstration from one of my studio assistants, her small hands covered in clay as she attempted to shape a simple pinch pot. "I've been watching Hannah these past few months. She spends hours drawing, creating little sculptures from anything she can find. There's an artistic streak in her that I never really noticed before, or perhaps never fully valued." I followed her gaze, seeing my niece with fresh eyes, the intense concentration as she worked the clay, the careful attention to detail that suggested an artistic sensibility beginning to emerge. "She has Rose's hands," I observed, noting the particular way Hannah's fingers curved around the material. "The same dexterity in the photographs I've seen." That's what Grandma said too, Eliza confirmed. She thinks Hannah might be the next Carter woman to carry forward that creative legacy. Not through me, but finding its own path nonetheless. The observation contained a generous acknowledgement. That artistic legacy might flow through unexpected channels, not following the neat lines of primogeniture or conventional succession that our family had once prioritized. Across the gallery, my father approached, his expression suggesting he'd reached some sort of internal resolution. He'd been the most resistant to the ring's redirection, his sense of proper order and tradition most disrupted by my grandmother's insistence on honoring Rose's actual wishes rather than the family narrative he had helped establish. "Sophie," he said, reaching my side, "I owe you an apology." The directness of his statement caught me off guard. My father rarely acknowledged errors in judgment, particularly in public settings. "For what?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. "For failing to recognize the significance of your work," he replied, gesturing around the gallery, "and for insisting on a family tradition that honored form over substance." Coming from my father, who had built his life around clear structures and defined expectations, this represented a significant shift in perspective. "What changed your mind?" I asked, genuinely curious about his evolution. He glanced toward my grandmother, who was now engaged in animated conversation with several gallery visitors about a display of Rose's original pieces I'd included as part of the exhibition's historical context. "Your grandmother can be quite persuasive when she commits to correcting misconceptions," he said with a rueful smile. "But mostly it was seeing how the ring has found its proper place, not just on your hand, but in an actively creative life. Seeing how you've integrated it into your work rather than preserving it as a symbol." He nodded toward a series of photographs displayed near the gallery entrance, images I'd commissioned documenting my creative process. In several, the sapphire ring was clearly visible on my clay-covered hand as I worked at the wheel or applied glazes to finished pieces. "That's how Rose wore it," he acknowledged. "Not as a precious object to be protected, but as a working part of her creative identity. I never fully understood that aspect of its significance until I saw these photographs of you wearing it the same way." His recognition that the ring's value lay not just in its material worth or family history, but in its active participation in creative work, represented a fundamental shift in how he understood our family's relationship to its artistic legacy. As the evening progressed and guests began to depart, I found myself standing with my grandmother beside the display of Rose's original pieces, plates, vases, and bowls that had established Carter Ceramics as a distinctive studio in the post-war years. Their clean lines and vibrant glazes still felt contemporary despite being created over half a century earlier. "You've done well," Grandma Eleanor said, her voice containing the particular satisfaction of seeing a long-held vision finally realized. "Not just with your work, but with honoring Rose's legacy in its fullest sense." I touched the sapphire ring, now so familiar on my hand that I sometimes forgot its presence until it caught the light. "It took your voice to reveal the truth, to challenge the simplified narrative we'd all accepted without question." "Some truths require persistence," she replied with a small smile, "particularly when they contradict comfortable assumptions about how traditions should function." As the last guest departed and my family helped with the initial cleanup, I found myself contemplating how a single object, the sapphire ring, had catalyzed a fundamental reassessment of our family's understanding of legacy and inheritance. What had begun as a straightforward passing down of a family heirloom had evolved into a more nuanced recognition that true legacy transcends conventional succession, seeking authentic connection across generations. The ring had finally resumed the journey Rose had envisioned for it, not following the path of primogeniture or social expectation, but seeking out the Carter woman in each generation who most embodied her independent spirit and creative vision. In correcting its course, we had also begun correcting our understanding of what constituted meaningful continuity in a family's story, recognizing that legacy flows not just through bloodlines, but through shared values, vision, and purpose. As I locked the gallery door that night, the sapphire catching the streetlight one final time before I turned toward home, I felt connected not just to the physical object I now wore, but to the lineage of creative determination it represented, a legacy I would eventually be responsible for passing forward, guided not by conventional expectation, but by authentic recognition of where Rose's spirit might next take root in our family tree. 5 years later, on a bright spring morning, I watched as 10-year-old Hannah sat at my second pottery wheel, her small hand steadily centering a ball of clay with surprising skill for her age. The sapphire ring gleamed on my right hand as I adjusted her elbow position slightly, guiding without interfering. "Like this, Aunt Sophie?" she asked, her brow furrowed in concentration as the clay began to rise between her fingers. Perfect, I confirmed, stepping back to let her work independently. You have a natural feel for the clay. Saturday morning pottery lessons with Hannah had become a cherished ritual, evolving from simple pinch pots and coil construction to more advanced techniques as her interest and abilities had grown. What had begun as casual creative play had gradually revealed a genuine talent and passion that echoed Rose's artistic sensibility in unexpected ways. From a shelf nearby, one of Rose's original vases caught the morning light, its distinctive blue glaze, the same shade as the sapphire, as my eyes, as Hannah's eyes, creating a visual connection across 4 generations of Carter women. The ring on my hand was no longer simply jewelry or even family heirloom, but a tangible reminder of how legacy finds its authentic path, sometimes flowing directly, sometimes skipping generations, but always seeking genuine connection. Grandma Eleanor says I have hands like great-great-grandma Rose, Hannah commented, carefully pulling up the walls of her cylinder. Do you think that's true? I smiled, recognizing in her question the beginning of understanding her place in our family's creative lineage. I think Rose's spirit shows up in different ways in different generations. In your hands, certainly. In your eye for color. In the patience you bring to difficult techniques. As Hannah continued working, absorbed in the meditative process of throwing, I contemplated how the truth revealed by my grandmother's voice years ago had expanded into a richer, more nuanced understanding of family inheritance, one that valued authentic connection over conventional succession, that recognized multiple forms of legacy flowing simultaneously through our family tree. The sapphire ring would continue its journey, eventually seeking out the next Carter woman who embodied Rose's independent spirit and creative vision. Looking at Hannah, her determined focus, her intuitive understanding of the clay, her willingness to embrace the messy, unpredictable nature of creative work, I wondered if the ring's next bearer might already be revealing herself, not through birth order or social expectation, but through the authentic expression of a shared artistic legacy. Family heirlooms carry stories that often extend beyond their official histories. What treasured objects in your family might hold more complex narratives than the ones typically shared? Consider the voices that may have been diminished and how these legacies are understood and passed down. Sometimes, the true value of an inheritance lies not in following established traditions without question, but in understanding the authentic intentions behind them. What truth might be waiting for someone in your family to reveal, reshaping not just how physical objects are passed down, but how your family understands its most meaningful legacies?